This is OTR FM of the IOM Radio Network.
Welcome to Cracked, the podcast, the program that slays the dragons of mental health by stripping away the shame, embarrassment, fear, and stigma. Because mental health isn't something that affects just some of us, it applies to all of us. Here to shine a new light on areas of mental health that often go unvisited are your hosts, Rebecca Shaper and Sandy Sedgbeer.
Hello and welcome to Crack the Podcast, Slaying the Dragons of Mental Health, with me, Sandy Sedgbeer.
And me, Rebecca Shaper.
And today we're going to be speaking with former US Army intelligence officer and Professor of Security Studies at Georgetown University, Elizabeth A Stanley, PhD, whose healing journey from chronic stress led to the development of a groundbreaking, evidence-based approach to resilience called Mindfulness-based Mind Fitness Training, or MMFT. Dr. Elizabeth Stanley, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me today, Sandy and Rebecca. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you. Elizabeth, you've written 2 award-winning books, Paths to Peace, and your latest book, Widen the Window, Training Your Brain and Body to Thrive During Stress and Recover from Trauma, which provide a new understanding of stress and trauma and offer tools to help people heal and thrive. We'd like to start by hearing about your own personal experience.
I come from a long warrior lineage. There has been Stanley serving in the U.S. Army every generation back to the American Revolutionary War. My sister and I are the first generation of women to serve, but both my father and my grandfather saw combat in World War II, Korea, Vietnam. And as a result, there is sort of a family lineage, not just of serving in the military, but also of intergenerational trauma. I experienced a lot of chronic stress and childhood adversity as a child, sexual violence as a teenager, then served in the Army myself after an ROTC scholarship and deployed overseas, was in Asia and Europe and did 2 deployments in the Balkans. And while I was in the Balkans, experienced a near-death experience. By the time I left the Balkans and returned to graduate school, my system had really had enough. And I had been coping through the decades the way many of us, especially in military settings, have been socialized to cope, by pushing it under, compartmentalizing it, powering through. And as a result, my body really bore the burden of that suppression and that denial. So that by the time I was in graduate school, I was suffering from chronic respiratory diseases. I had insomnia, depression, and PTSD myself. And the journey of creating mindfulness-based mind fitness training and offering it in high-stress environments, researching it with military troops before they deployed, writing the book, all of that kind of comes from my own healing journey. And I think in some ways there's nothing that I teach that I haven't learned from first in my own mind and body.
Yeah, as you say, you've got skin in the game.
Yep.
Yeah. So widen the window. It's a very unusual phrase and an intriguing title for a book. And it's a phrase that we could apply to so many things. So tell us what that term means and what window are we talking about here? Are we having a little bit of a technical glitch here?
I don't think she can hear us.
We've dropped Elizabeth. Okay, well, I'm sure she's going to come straight back on. Let's just talk a little bit about how this book impacted you, Rebecca. I mean, it's such a story.
Oh, it's an amazing story, and I think here she comes.
Here we are.
Hey,
We lost you. Did you get to hear the question, Elizabeth?
I did not hear the question, please.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So what I said was that widen the window is an unusual phrase and an intriguing title for a book. So what does the term mean, and what window are we talking about?
The window is the window of tolerance to stress that each of us have wired throughout our life. And people's windows can widen or narrow depending upon their repeated experiences. Those of us who've narrowed our window, as I had, childhood adversity or through shock trauma events like natural disasters or combat or rape, or even just through everyday life, chronic stress or relational trauma at home or in the workplace, even in the community. Any of these things can narrow our window of tolerance and make it more likely that we will not be able to perform well during stress, and that we'll also be building a stress load, an allostatic load in our body and in our mind. And eventually that leads to symptoms. But the reason I called the book Widen the Window is that everybody can actually widen their window. They can recover from prior stress, recover from that stress load they may have already accumulated. And in the process of doing that, they have much more capacity during stress. People with wide windows are much more tolerant of uncertainty. They're much better at adapting when their plans get interrupted. They're better at staying connected to people during stress, and they're able to recover after stressful experiences so that it doesn't have the same kind of toxic effect building up on the mind and body.
I've got a quick question. Have you ever run into anybody who's been so blocked that they can't widen their window?
So wonderful question.
And what do you do in that case?
Well, I have to say we can have our window quite narrowed to the point where someone, their survival brain, the part of the brain that does our threat assessment unconsciously and that turns on stress, for someone whose window is so narrowed, any experience could trigger something for their survival brain and send them into kind of default programming that may not be aligned with what's actually happening right now. And it's important when someone is in that place that they work to widen their window narrow, very kind of gradually, so that they don't inadvertently re-trigger it and reinforce and re-traumatize their mind and body. So I wouldn't say I've ever met a window that's too narrow to be widened, but I would say that when the window is very narrow, one has to do it very gradually, and it really requires being super intentional and understanding how the mind and body can get re-triggered so that we direct our attention in ways that don't inadvertently do that and make it worse.
That makes sense. I would think you would have a little bit of research to that individual so you would know how to do it in baby steps.
Yes,
And
I think you also can tell in terms of the way that their mind and body are reacting to certain events, and so that you can begin to help balance that out.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how does the program actually work?
Yeah.
So MFIT, that's how we pronounce the acronym. You couldn't work in a high stress environment without having an acronym. So we had one, MMFT, which we pronounce MFIT. And it focuses on building interoceptive awareness, which is awareness of sensations in the body. And the reason why we focus on that is that interoceptive awareness provides this wonderful bridge between our thinking brain, the parts of our brain that does deliberate decision making, helps us focus our attention, pay attention, make decisions, use our language. And interoceptive awareness balances and connects from those thinking brain functions to the survival brain functions, which I mentioned before, that unconscious threat appraisal that's either turning stress on or turning stress off. The survival brain only communicates with us through emotions and through body sensations. So we need to learn how to pay attention to those sensations and understand the cues that the survival brain is sending us. And then we can interpret those cues and then direct our attention in ways to help the survival brain feel safe. Because it's only when the survival brain is perceiving safety that it can turn on recovery functions. So MFIT is kind of built on this principle. Training the attention to build interoceptive awareness gradually, so we don't re-traumatize, and then also directing the attention in particular ways so that we can help the survival brain turn on recovery and recover and widen the window over time. So we build the attention gradually so as not to really re-traumatize. And the program is a kind of blend of mindfulness training, of techniques and concepts from some of the body-based trauma therapies. I'm a certified practitioner of one of them, somatic experiencing. And then the science, the understanding, so that the thinking brain can kind of be on board with what's happening, to understand why our mind and body do what they do, so we don't take it personally, and so that we can begin to work effectively with our survival brain instead of overriding it, or letting it run amok with, letting emotions and stress drive our decisions.
It's very interesting. I find it very fascinating. Very, very fascinating. So MMFT research has been featured on 60 Minutes, ABC Evening News, NPR, Time Magazine, The Washington Post, and many other media outlets, and you've taught these tools to thousands in high-stress environments, including corporate leaders, first responders, healthcare workers, diplomats, military service members, and members of Congress. So where do you start? What was your original inspiration through all this? That's what I'd like to know.
As I said at the beginning of our conversation, the original inspiration was my own mind and body, like trying to make it possible for me to be able to function again in the world. My nadir of my own suffering happened because I had Lyme disease, but didn't know it, and lost my eyesight for a period of time. And it's very hard to be a professor without eyesight. And I realized I really needed to learn a new way of doing it. So I first found mindfulness techniques. They actually brought up so much stuff that it was re-traumatizing me. And none of my mindfulness teachers could explain to me what was going on with me. So I figured something must be wrong with me. I tried a variety of therapies. Eventually, I found some of these body-based techniques, and they were working. And then I wanted to know why? How does this work? And so I did a deep dive into the science. And as I was doing all of that, I realized my experience with mindfulness was not that unique. Anyone who's had a lot of stress and trauma is probably going to have this response. And I want to now share that. And the first place I wanted to share it with was military troops. Many of them were doing multiple deployments with not much time at home for recovery. They were noticing their windows get narrower and narrower and narrower after each deployment. And so I found my first neuroscience research partner, Amishi Jha, and we did our first pilot study with a group of Marines that were preparing for deployment. And from that experience, I had a chance to see that all of what I had learned about my own mind and body was not unique to me. It was indeed something happening in anyone who had experienced chronic stress or trauma. And that helped me tweak MFIT. And then from there, we did 3 more studies with troops. And then I started teaching in a lot of other settings. And now in this last year, I created an online version of the course with Sounds True. It's available on demand. We launched it in November, but it's available on demand. Anyone can start at any time. And we have several thousand people in the course right now. And so it's getting a whole new reach much further than just me and trainers that I've trained to be able to offer it. And I'm glad for that.
I saw that on Sound True. I listened to that podcast, and I did. I saw that on Sound True. So let me ask you this question: what about the family members? Does this tie? How do you deal with the family members, the wives, the people who are trying to support their loved one who has gone through such traumatic experiences? How do you work with the family?
I have trained many family members. Often when we have done research studies, we have also offered workshops for family members that wanted to participate so they could learn what their
Right.
military spouse was experiencing. I have a particular kind of passion for helping military family members, having been one and having watched that effect, the trickle effect in my own family of origin. And there's been a lot of research done in the last, I'd say, 10 years, looking at some of that ripple and trickle effect. When a military service member comes back with PTSD, the likelihood of it rippling and creating PTSD in the spouse, and then over the next 2 years, having ripple effects in terms of symptoms of dysregulation, attention problems, in emotional outbursts, depression, anxiety, ADHD in their children. Like it ripples. Narrow windows ripple in a family. And so it's really important that parents understand that, and that parents do whatever they can to widen their own window to ensure that their children's windows are going to be able to be wired in a wide way as well.
And we're not just talking about military families. I mean, this works for anyone.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when you're writing about the thinking brain and the survival brain, you talked about certain coping strategies that we kind of pick up as we go through life, some of which are actually praised, it's a badge of honor. But you say that quite often we are dysregulated when we are engaged in these. So tell us, what can we do about that? How can we undo some of this conditioning that we've had around stress and trauma?
Part of the reason I wrote the book and have a chapter kind of dedicated to some of our cultural ideas around stress and trauma. And as you say, Sandy, that stress is considered a badge of honor. When we are stressed out, that means we're important and busy and special. And yet no one wants to own the trauma part. The trauma part is sort of associated with being weak and broken. The thing is, they're a continuum, and the behaviors that we're choosing to move through life are actually leading us to narrower windows, but we don't connect the dots between our behaviors and the eventual consequences of that. So I wanted to write the book to help connect some of those dots for people. In our cultures, we tend to, especially in the West, really exemplify that grit and suck it up and drive on and powering through and constantly being on, that we value those things as being signs of resilience. They're not actually signs of resilience. They are signs of someone who is in a thinking brain override mode. And yes, it takes a lot of strength and willpower to keep pushing like that. But eventually the costs come due. And the longer that we push, the more likely it is that we'll either develop physical symptoms or it comes out sideways in our relationships, in a health crisis, in unethical behavior, because willpower is actually a thinking brain function. And when we've had our window narrowed over time, you can only access willpower to a certain point, and then you don't have it anymore. So I wanted to help connect all of those dots. We value these ways of moving through the world, and they're not actually really in balance for our whole mind and body.
Yeah, we're certainly learning that now, aren't we?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, for sure. Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Wow.
One of the ways that the thinking brain tries to feel in control is, and this is just a kind of not one of the big dramatic ways, but one of the ways that I think everyone has seen during the pandemic, especially. Our thinking brains want to be able to predict the future so that we can prevent the things that we don't want from happening. Like, we want to be able to do that. And so the thinking brain, when it doesn't have the information it needs, especially when it can't look back into the past to say, well, how did I do this last time and how would I do it differently now? None of us in our lifetimes have had a global pandemic, so it isn't like we could look back into the past and figure that out. And so instead, our thinking brains go to try and they get ravenous for information. It's one of the reasons why we're sort of stuck doom scrolling on our devices. What's the new count? What's going on? Or if we don't want to go get information in kind of a way of seeking it, our minds will start these loops of, well, what if this happens? And what if that happens? And all of these worst case kind of scenario awfulizing that our thinking brains will do. All of these things might help our thinking brains feel more in control. But all of them are actually leading the survival brain to turn more stress on. And so it's this paradox. The habits we think are going to help us feel better, they help our thinking brain feel better. They're actually making it worse for our survival brain, and they're making it worse in terms of our stress load. And it's kind of a big paradox that makes it more and more likely that we will be narrowing our window over time.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it makes sense. When you talk about it, it makes total sense, for sure. You provide a critical evaluation of many of the strategies we are encouraged to rely on for stress, like reframing situations to find the positive. What do you feel is wrong with these strategies? I'm real curious on this.
So I just shared some techniques that we use individually to help our thinking brains calm our anxiety about the uncertain future, right? Well, there are also some clinical techniques that we use collectively that are very thinking brain dominant as well. Some of them are, hail from the positive psychology movement, this idea of reframing a situation to see the positive, trying to figure out what you're grateful for, making gratitude journals or lists, setting goals and having kind of goal planning, visualization. Not that these things are wrong, it's just that they are incomplete because these are thinking brain strategies. They help our thinking brain feel better, but they're not getting at what turns on or turns off stress. That's our survival brain. And so we have to be working effectively with our survival brain, because only our survival brain is deciding whether we've turned stress on or turned it off, and whether we're building a stress load. So we can be grateful all day. We can have a positive reframe all day, but that's not necessarily going to deal with this building stress load that our survival brain is in charge of.
You're listening to Crack the Podcast with me, Sandy Sedgbeer, and my co-host, Rebecca Shaper. And we're speaking with former US Army intelligence officer and professor of security studies at Georgetown University, Dr. Elizabeth A. Stanley. We're looking at her research and her program, MFIT, Mindfulness-based Mind Fitness Training program. And we're also talking about her book, Widen the Window, Training Your Brain and Body to Thrive During Stress and Recover from Trauma. We'll be back with more from Dr. Stanley after this break.
The Real Conscious Connection. Om Times Radio. IOM FM. Om Times Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. Om Times, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
Hello, I'm Sandy Sedgbeer, host of Om Times Magazine's flagship radio show, What is Going Om. My passion is sifting through information, research, and innovations from new thought teachers, speakers, and researchers pushing back the boundaries of what we know about life, energy, metaphysics, and the universe. I love shifting perceptions about who we are, why we're here, and how quickly impossible becomes normal when we open our minds, expand our awareness, and accept that the only limits that exist are those we place upon ourselves. So if you're the kind of forward-thinking, eager investigator of what lies beyond the current reality that most perceive, why not make a date to come play with me in the field of possibilities at 4 p.m. Pacific Time, 7 p.m. Eastern Time every Thursday, and together we can discover what's really going on.
Worried about your friend but don't know how to reach out?
You can say how are you or get a fake tattoo. You can ask with an app if it works for you. You can chat with them in VR. It's so good. If you think you should check in, yeah, you should. Whatever gets you talking.
Reach out to a friend about their mental health.
Whatever gets you talking.
Learn how you can help at seizetheawkward.org.
Welcome back to Crack the Podcast. Elizabeth, is there something else you want to add to what you were saying before the break, before we move on to the other questions we have for you?
Why don't we move on to other questions? And I'm sure if there was something else that I meant to add, I will loop it in.
Okay. You talk a lot in the book about agency and choice. Now, agency is a word that I hear coming up a lot. What does that mean to you?
Agency to me is the ability to recognize that we are always empowered to take action. We're always empowered to make a choice. And we may be in completely uncontrollable external circumstances. But even in those situations, we always have agency in terms of where we're directing our attention and how we are making sense of the situation. And sometimes just those two things, where we're directing our attention and how we make sense of a situation, is enough to really lead to a tremendous shift that helps us find places where we can have impact, where we can take action or say something or decide something that can really even shift what might have initially seemed a completely uncontrollable situation.
Can you give some examples?
Yes. So one of the lineages that MFIT draws from, besides mindfulness training and the body-based trauma therapies, is the lineage of the warrior traditions. In part because I come from such a long warrior lineage myself, I was really curious and did a lot of research into how did earlier generations of warriors cope effectively to help defend their communities, to keep their communities safe, even when situations around them were quite intolerable. And one thing that I learned from learning about all of these traditions is that they all focused very much on training the mind and body to be able to access agency even in really dire situations. And they did that by realizing how much having a wide window of tolerance to stress, so that the thinking brain could be online and the survival brain could be online together during a stressful situation. That allowed them to function effectively because they had all the thinking brain decision making online, but it also helped to protect them from trauma. You know, as I said earlier in our interview, stress and trauma are a continuum. And where we are on that continuum has everything to do with how wide our window is. If our window is narrow and we are in a stressful situation, it is much more likely that our survival brain is going to perceive us as helpless or powerless or lacking in control. And those are the features that make our survival brain turn on a trauma response. So when the window is wider, when we're able to find agency, we're protected from feeling powerless, helpless, and lacking control. And that can protect us from trauma. So all of those pieces kind of came together for me And it's the reason why 8 chapters of the book are focused on how to find agency, even during stress, because that's protective. It helps us function well, but it's also really protective for our minds and bodies.
So we're likening that to having a full complement of tools at our disposal.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yes. Wow.
And in some ways, there is an individual window that we each have, but there's also a collective window. And when the collective window is narrowed, we're collectively more likely to experience trauma. We're collectively more likely to feel helpless or powerless or not in control. But when the collective window is wide, when we have a lot of adaptive capacity, a lot of tools in the toolkit, even when the universe throws very challenging things at us, we can still figure out a way through it, find some adaptability, access tools, access relationships, so that we won't get caught in a trauma response, but we will be able to access agency and move through it, with grace and compassion and determination and skill.
So that leads me to the next question. While you were in Bosnia, you had a near-death experience. Could you tell us what happened?
Yes. So before, I'm going to back up to explain how it happened. Before I went to Bosnia, I was doing 2 jobs at the same time. I was in charge of helping to mobilize. I was in a military intelligence unit, and we were in charge of all of the interpreters for the American units that were going to be needed there. And so the U.S. Army did not have very many Serbo-Croatian speakers. So we were getting supplements from all over, from all the different services, and they were coming to join our unit. And I was in charge of that endeavor. As at that point, Russian linguist, I was also learning Serbo-Croatian full-time myself. And so it meant I was working about 120 hours a week. It was just insane. And I did that for several months before we deployed. You can imagine that's a lot of sucking it up and driving on. There wasn't much sleeping happening. There wasn't much of anything happening but me.
It's a warrior effect.
But I ended up getting sick partway through that with a cold, and I was not ever taking a break, and I just kept going. And so the cold eventually became pneumonia, but I didn't know it. So then we are deploying. We get to Hungary, which was the base camp, and then we were going to be convoying in through Croatia to get to Bosnia. And I was put in charge of a convoy of 100 vehicles and all the people on that. And it was the middle of winter, it was January, lots of ice, lots of snow, and some of the 5-ton trucks in my convoy were pulling big, heavy generators, and they jackknifed in the snow and ice and fell over into a bunch of houses in a village and crashed these houses, and they're all on their side. And it took the Croatian government finding a 20-ton crane to be able to get these vehicles back up. And as a result, we were stuck on the side of the road with 3 feet of snow in Croatia for 3 days until the Croatian government could get this. I'm in charge of these, 100 people and all these vehicles that are stuck there in the middle of nowhere. And I have pneumonia, but I don't know it. I'm just hacking up a lung all the time. I'm not sleeping. We have no heat except when we run our vehicles. Not a good condition to be in. So by the time we eventually get into Bosnia, 5 days later, we get to what is going to become our base camp. We're in the zone of separation in a little town east of Tuzla, and we're supposed to be setting up this base camp in this old abandoned bus factory. And it's been bombed because this town has changed sides multiple times in the war. And we're having to clear out, there's again 3 feet of snow, so we're not going to put up our tents in the snow. So we try to clear out some of these bombed out buildings so we'd have a concrete floor to put our tents on. And while we're clearing out these bombed out buildings, again, this is like 5 days of being awake. I have pneumonia that I don't know about. All the concrete dust. I eventually stopped breathing. I had this very intense asthma attack. I didn't have asthma, but it was like an asthma attack. And I stopped breathing, and I had to be medevaced by the UN to a UN hospital and revived. I left my body. I had a classic near-death experience. I really didn't want to go back, but there was this very kind voice that said, you need to go back. And so I came back on the table being resuscitated, and I was in that hospital for 2 days, and then I rejoined my unit. It was kind of that intense. And then I was back in the hospital again about a month later, and it sort of set the stage for a lot of lung problems for quite some time.
Did you feel after that experience that, did that drive you to find a solution to this? I mean, did you feel changed in some way and that you wanted to do something really purposeful?
The voice that spoke to me as I was moving to light was the most loving voice I had ever heard in my life. And when it said with just infinite love, you have to go back, it did touch me in a very deep way. And it took me quite some time to figure out why I was supposed to have come back. I ended up going through a very deep depression, and I wasn't sure what I was meant to be here for. But I knew that I would not have been sent back in that way if there wasn't some purpose for being here. So yes, it wasn't like the purpose was instantaneous. Yeah. I went right back into, being in Bosnia and coping with all of these troops and being sick at the same time. And coping with an ongoing sexual harassment situation that eventually led me to leave the military. That was going on during that time too. And so it took a while to find what the purpose was. But I knew that if a voice that loving said I was supposed to still be here, then there must be some reason why I was supposed to still be here.
I'm just curious, Liz, with that voice, do you think it was a loved one who had passed over that you knew? Or do you feel that voice is still guiding you through your purpose?
Yes, it's clearly a guide. It's clearly a guide. And I have experienced this voice again in dreams. Yeah.
I love that. That's an incredible story. Very much.
And we hear such stories more and more these days. More and more. And we hear them especially with people who are highly trained, highly credentialed, and the way I tend to look at this, and I think Rebecca shares my view, is that we need people like you. We need, the scientists and the researchers to be able to talk about things like this and how it moved them forward to come up with something that's much more ecological, for people, in order to start changing the way we're doing some things.
Yes, I fully agree, Sandy. The way we as humans have been living so out of balance with our own minds and bodies, with our collective other humans, with the other species, with the planet, just the imbalances that we have created through the ways that we have been moving through the world. It's not sustainable in any way at all. And I do feel that as challenging as these times are that we're living through right now, they're also this amazing gift and this opportunity for us to be really opening to new ways and experimenting with new ways of living as individuals, as a collective, and in balance with the planet. It's so needed right now. It's so needed right now.
Well, if I can add another question here, because this naturally arises from what you've said. Given your credentials, given what you've achieved with this, given how you've taken it into the military, members of Congress, etc., and given the experience you had, where is this taking you?
Where is it taking me next? Yeah. I don't know. I'm not exactly sure. What I will say is, in some ways, this program, my thinking brain had always thought of it as just 2 chapters on this other book that I had been working on before that has been set aside for about 15 years. And I had grant money for it. I am going to go back to that book. And it's that the focus of that book is very much on our over-reliance on technology and the imbalances that creates. And it feels in some ways like it's odd that I took this detour through learning all the neurobiology of stress, trauma, and resilience to come back to technology. But at the same time, I also do feel like our use of technology contributes to some of the bigger imbalances we were just talking about. So I know that book is the next immediate thing, or at least a piece of the next immediate thing, although it's going to look very different than the chapters that I wrote back in 2007 as it comes to fruition. But beyond that, I think if I've learned anything over this like 50-year arc journey that I've been on so far, is that as much as our thinking brains think that they're in control of where we're going, they're not. We're not. And so I am much more open now to being guided. My goal is to help. I want to help. I want to help people understand. I want to help people learn that we have choice, that we can really make things different by choosing different things in our own minds and body. And so I am open to being guided to wherever that takes me, and I don't know where that is.
Yeah, that kind of leads me to a comment or maybe a question. Did you ever feel that losing your eyesight might be a purposeful message of some kind for you to see this traumatic experience as happening for you and not to you in order to help others? I feel that's what you're saying through all this. And I feel like just listening to that, you're going more with the flow. You're more comfortable with going with the flow and trusting and having faith.
Absolutely. At the time when I lost my eyesight, there was sort of one level to the metaphor that I didn't want to see what was in my life at that time. And that was true. I didn't want to see what was going on, and I needed to see it so I could choose some different things. I think on a kind of bigger level, losing my eyesight helped me realize just how much there are different levels of seeing. There are different levels of knowing. And I had been so deeply attached to my thinking brain's way of knowing, when actually there is this amazing organic intelligence that's part of our survival brain knowing. And then there's a wider kind of spiritual knowing, and we can access those levels when we're open to it. I think when I teach so many of my students at Georgetown, they come into my office. Well, not this year. They come into my Zoom office this year. But before this year, they would come into my office and they would have kind of the next 10 years all planned out. I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do this. And I say to them, it's great for your thinking brain to think that's how it's going to unfold. But we're not in control of that. Like what we can be in control of is we can hold an intention, and we can hold a direction that we intend to move. Mm-hmm. But the cosmos doesn't move in a very linear path. It moves through all kinds of twists and turns. And to learn to be able to be comfortable with that reality, to not be anxious about that reality, because that is the reality. It's an important skill. And we will get where we're intended to be. We can hold a path direction and then be guided, through all the twists and turns of it.
Exactly.
So your research now must be taking you into places that you never would have imagined before. And I'm curious to know, does MFIT lend itself well to evolution? I mean, as you learn more, and as you said you're trained in somatic therapy, as you're learning more, as you're researching more, can you expand MFIT to incorporate other modalities?
I imagine that, the MFIT that I taught live back in 2008, during our first pilot study, is not the exact same MFIT that someone would take with Sounds True right now, because I've evolved, I've learned more through that. I've updated it with a lot of newest research, that didn't exist on the planet yet in 2008. And I imagine that any growth will continue to do that. It is important that we continue to stay on top of the new learning that is always emerging on our planet, and that we integrate it and that we take advantage of it. I think, though, one of the reasons why so many large institutions, large healthcare institutions especially, are still relying, back to something we talked about a while ago, still relying so much on these thinking brain dominant techniques like cognitive behavioral therapy, for example. They say, well, it's evidence-based, it has 40 years of evidence behind it. Yes, but there's also been 40 years, 50 years of this other research that doesn't take advantage of where we now know. So it's really important. And I think when people look back 50 years from now, they'll be like, you didn't used to think about the body? You didn't used to think about the survival brain? And who knows what the cutting edge will be at that point. We need to continue evolving. We do.
Right. I mean, when my parents grew up, they didn't stop and think, okay, now how does my body feel in this situation? I mean, it's always evolving, and I love it. I just, love it.
So what sort of research is attracting you now? Because once you go down that rabbit hole, you got to keep going. And I would imagine all sorts of incredible new research is opening up to you.
I am right now working on a series of articles with some of looking at the effects of the leaders' windows, the width of leaders' windows, and the effects of that on the collective. In the last, I only have a little bit at the end in the last chapter of Widen the Window about our social wiring, the neurobiology of our social wiring, and much of that research is still pretty new. Like in the last 5 years, this understanding of some of these different neurobiological mechanisms by which we're wired to connect. They feed things like stress contagion and emotion contagion, which people have known about for a while, but now beginning to see certain parts of our brain are why we have mirror neurons, which help us do motor resonance with others. We also have parts of the brain that kind of guide us so that we will want to choose the behavior that is in line with our social group's norms. We have parts of the brain that help us understand who we are when we define our self-identity. But these same parts of the brain, and right now I'm talking about the medial prefrontal cortex, they also light up when we're listening to persuasive messages from others. So the part of us that who we are is also the same part that picks up from others. And I think that this is kind of a real cutting edge. The place that has picked up on it the most so far, most of us living in capitalist societies, this shouldn't surprise you, is marketing. And that's one way to take that research. But I actually think there's many more impactful ways we can take this understanding and recognize just how much the way we individually are moving through the world is impacting everyone around us, and especially for leaders. And so that's a place where I'm really interested in working on several things right now.
I'm so glad you said that. I mean, when we look at the digitization of technology, we look at the media, we look at how much information is passing in front of us constantly, like ticker tape on our phones. People's minds are being hijacked, and it's getting easier and easier to hijack them. So, any research where people can learn about agency, where they can, learn to widen their window and not be influenced so much by that, has to be really important right now.
Thank you. I think so too. And this is where it kind of dovetails back to the project I had been working on before about technology. And I feel like there are a lot of people who are real techies. There are a lot of people who are technophobes. But I don't think either of those camps really have much understanding of how human minds and bodies kind of fully interact with that, especially during stress and uncertainty. And that's kind of all of those pieces coming together, and then the important roles of teachers, of therapists, of leaders, of pastors, of even media celebrities in influencing that confluence.
Yeah. Wow. I can see one heck of a book coming out on this. Yeah, it's such an important subject, and I don't think we've even scratched the surface. Yeah.
I mean, yes, this is fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. I just really appreciate you being here with us and answering all these questions for us and explaining everything, because it's something we definitely need to know and be aware of, for sure.
And as I mentioned earlier, I love the fact that people with the kind of degrees and the credentials that you've got are now moving in this direction, because you've already got the platforms, you've already got the respect. People know this isn't kind of, off the wall stuff. This is something really important that we need to look at as a society, as a global society, because we only have to see what's happening right now, to know the road we don't want to go down.
Absolutely. Yeah. In some ways, the coronavirus pandemic has been this amazing opportunity for us collectively to really realize, not that we weren't realizing it, we really weren't, around the interconnectedness with climate change, but just, as we look now with the mutations of the virus, and, you can't just immunize your own country. It's the virus will continue to mutate in other places and boomerang back. It's just these wonderful reminders of how much we are a global community, and we have to be crafting solutions that work as a globe. And that means no one left behind, no part of the planet.
No one. We're a hive. We're a hive, one big hive. So we're almost out of time. Before we have to start thinking about wrapping up, can you just tell us your Sounds True? You're doing this on Sounds True. It's quite different than the way you taught it before. What sort of experience is it? I mean, can I just go there, do this course?
Yes. So it is an 8-week course, like the live training is normally taught, but it is self-paced. And instead of being in a classroom with 40 other people where, you're hearing some slides and talking it through and practicing exercises, here it is short 5 to 15 minute videos. Each module, there's one module a week. Each module has a couple of these videos that kind of give some of the science. And then there's some interactive activities. And then there's also the baseline practices, the mind fitness training practices. We ask people to practice up to 30 minutes a day. Although I will admit that in our published research, the troops were practicing about 12 minutes a day. And we're seeing real substantial effects in the way that their brain fired, in the way that their hormones were working, in the way that their heart rate and breathing rate functioned during stress. So even just 12 minutes a day has been shown to have effect. So you take the course, it's on demand. If you want to take longer than 8 weeks, you can. There are many people in the course who've been in it for quite some time now, and since November, and they're kind of taking their time, practicing with the guided audio instructions for the attention training exercises. The modules, the first 4, kind of focus on the basics of the science of our minds and bodies during stress, trauma, and resilience. And then the last 4 modules focus then a little more interpersonally. So the science of habits, how we can do habit change, science of our emotions, and harnessing our emotions effectively in decisions and regulating our emotions, our social wiring, especially during stress and conflict. So those are some of the topics kind of in the later modules. But the course is still online. Will be online. It's evergreen, so the link is on my website. And if someone is a first responder or in the military or a veteran, public school teachers, a medical worker, the Sounds True Foundation, part of why I partnered with them was because they did some fundraising to be able to offer the course for free to people who are in these professions. So if you are in these professions and want to take the course, just go to the link and then fill out the form.
Okay, we have to leave it here, Elizabeth. Could you quickly give our viewers your website address?
Yes, Elizabeth-Stanley.com, and you can access all of the published research there and the links to the Sounds True course, as well as the guided audio instructions for the first exercise in the sequence.
Okay, well, I think we're going to have our plug pulled any second now. So just tell us the title of the book again, and then we'll have to say goodbye.
Yes, Widen the Window, Training Your Brain and Body to Thrive During Stress and Recover from Trauma. Rebecca and Sandy, thank you so much for having me today.
And thank you.
Elizabeth, it's our pleasure.
This was phenomenal.
Phenomenal. Okay.
Thank you.
Right, we have to leave it there before they pull the plug. We'll be back in 2 weeks' time with another edition of Crack to the Podcast. Till then, it's goodbye from me.
And me, Rebecca Shaker.
And don't forget, there's a crack in everything. It's where the light gets in.